He splashed soda on the dog just for a laugh, unaware that the owner was a Navy SEAL. On the scorching Arizona pavement stood a German Shepherd named Maverick. His fur was sticky with a liquid that smelled of cola. A group of teenagers laughed while recording the scene on their phones. To them, it seemed like a harmless prank. Nearby, trembling with rage and fear, was a 10-year-old girl named Harper. She shielded the dog and screamed, "Leave him alone." But the laughter stopped abruptly. Heavy footsteps sounded from behind. A man in military uniform was approaching. His eyes held no fury, only an icy stillness. The uniformed man drew closer. The teenagers immediately fell silent. Even the street noise seemed to vanish. He stopped in front of them, calmly removed his sunglasses, and said softly, "Gentlemen, I believe you've met my dog." His voice was deep, possessing such steel that the boys instinctively backed away. No one knew they were facing Mason Williams, a former Navy SEAL with 20 years of service and dozens of classified operations he never spoke of. Maverick remained motionless. He stood by Harper, glaring at the bullies as if awaiting an order. The girl gripped his collar tightly, feeling his muscles quiver beneath the wet fur. "We were just kidding," muttered a tall boy in a white t-shirt. "What's the big deal?" "Just a joke," Mason repeated quietly, stepping forward. "Sometimes jokes are far too expensive." He looked at the phone in the teenager's hand. "Delete the recording. Now." The boy obeyed instantly. The others shifted from foot to foot, not knowing where to look. Harper looked at her father. For the first time, she felt a bit safer. There was no anger in his voice, only firmness and a weight that the boys felt without words. "Take Maverick home," he told his daughter. "Wash his fur before the sugar dries. I'll catch up." Harper nodded, hugged the dog, and headed toward the house. Mason stayed behind, looking at those who dared to humiliate his only friend. "You don't even realize who you touched," he said quietly. "This dog has saved more lives than you will ever see." Silence filled the air. No one dared to reply. When Harper and Maverick disappeared around the corner, Mason remained standing across from the young men. His gaze was steady, but something in it made each of them feel like they were under interrogation. "You're Brad Anderson, correct?" he asked evenly, eyes fixed on the tall boy in the white shirt. "Son of Richard Anderson, head of the city council." Brad froze. "Yeah. So what?" His voice wavered. "Nothing, just confirming." Mason narrowed his eyes slightly. "DUI arrests. 2 cases. Files closed. Your father's connections helped." "Right." Silence. The guys looked at each other. "How do you?" one began. "For 20 years, I gathered intelligence that my men's lives depended on," Mason replied calmly. "Old habits don't die." He stepped closer with cold confidence. "You might think this was a silly prank, but in reality, you assaulted a service dog, a decorated veteran. That's a federal crime." Brad swallowed hard. "Look, we didn't know. It was just stupid." "Stupid," Mason echoed. "Fine, then you have 2 choices." He pulled out his phone and showed the screen, a video Harper had already forwarded. "Either I hand this over to the police and the press, your faces, your names, or," he paused, "tomorrow you go to the shelter. A second chance. You'll clean cages, wash dogs, and learn compassion. 20 hours a month. For 6 months." Brad exhaled, looking at his friends who were already backing away. "You can't make us." "I'm not forcing you," Mason replied calmly. "I'm offering." He put his phone away and stepped aside, clearing their path. Brad stood for a second, then muttered, "Fine, we'll show up." 9 a.m., Mason said. "Ask for Dr. Langley. Tell her I sent you." The man turned and walked away, leaving them on the hot asphalt, unsure how to handle their own humiliation. At home, Harper stood by the sink, carefully rinsing Maverick with a hose. Water ran down his thick coat along with the sticky cola. "You're not mad, right?" she whispered. "They just don't know you're a hero." The dog tilted his head, pressing against her hand. His eyes showed no fear, only weariness. When Mason entered, Harper ran to him. He didn't growl, "Dad," even when they poured it on him. He just stood there. Because he's trained not to answer evil with evil, Mason said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "That's why he's alive." Together they finished washing off the syrup. Maverick stood patiently like a soldier at his post. "Dad, why do you still wear the uniform?" Harper asked. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes it helps me remember who I am." Harper nodded, though she didn't fully understand. She hugged Maverick. "He's my best friend." "And mine," Mason said softly. "But even heroes get tired." He patted the dog's head and went to the porch. The sun was setting, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. Near the old fence, he noticed a neighbor, an elderly woman with a cane, a well-kept garden, and eyes full of wisdom. "You're just in time, Mason," she said, approaching. "I heard how you stopped them. It's a small town, rumors travel fast." "I'm no hero, Eleanor," he sighed. "Just protecting what I value." She looked at Maverick lying at the threshold. "Sometimes the hardest battles are fought at home, not at war." Mason nodded silently, knowing she was right. The next morning began quietly. Mason's house sat on the outskirts, modest and surrounded by an old wooden fence. Outside, the sand shimmered, and the wind carried the scent of dust. Maverick lay on the porch, head on his paws. He seemed to know it would be a difficult day. At 9 a.m., a silver pickup truck entered the Second Chance shelter parking lot. Brad Anderson stepped out, no chains, no bravado, wearing a plain gray shirt and jeans. His eyes hid fatigue and irritation. 6 months of humiliation, he thought as he walked to the entrance. Inside, he was met by a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a white coat. "You must be Brad," she said calmly. "I'm Dr. Langley, the center's director. Mason called and said you were coming." "He said it was a punishment," the boy said tentatively. "Here, we call it an opportunity," she smiled tiredly. "Come on, I'll show you the mop." Brad wanted to object but stayed silent. He wasn't used to people speaking to him without fear or flattery. The first task was cleaning the kennels. The smell, the grime, the hard labor, it stripped away his arrogance. By noon, his hands were blistered and his clothes were stained. Dr. Langley watched without interfering. "Remarkable," she said when he finished. "Richard Anderson's son with a bucket of water. The world is changing after all." He looked at her from under his brow. "Did you know my mother?" "I did. She founded this shelter 20 years ago. A magnificent woman, kind and strong." Langley took an old photo from a shelf. A woman with a soft smile was hugging a rescued dog. Catherine Anderson. Brad froze as memories flooded back, the scent of perfume, a quiet voice, childhood hands on warm fur. "My father said she just wasted money on strays." He was wrong, Langley said firmly. She helped those who couldn't protect themselves. That's strength, not weakness. Meanwhile, at Mason's house, life continued. Harper sat on the floor, drawing Maverick, his eyes, ears, and every curve of his muzzle. "He feels everything, Dad," she said without looking up. "When you're hurting, he's the first to know." Mason stood by the window, watching the wind ripple the old flag over the porch. "Yes, he's saved me more times than I can count." But lately, he noticed a heaviness in the dog's movements, a cough, and occasional tremors in his legs. Experience told him something was wrong. That evening, he took Maverick to the vet, Dr. Pattison. The gray-haired man met them with a nod, checking the dog's vitals. Mason watched the doctor's brow furrow as he examined the x-rays. "Give it to me straight," he said. Pattison sighed. "Cancer, Mason. It's in the lungs and bones. He has maybe 3 or 4 months left." Mason didn't flinch, but his fingers tightened on the leash. "What can we do?" "Ease the pain. Nothing more." Maverick lifted his head as if sensing the conversation was about him. Mason leaned down and touched his forehead. You won't give up, soldier, will you? The dog licked his hand. At the shelter, Brad was finishing his shift when Dr. Langley led him to a new kennel. In the corner sat a dog, dirty, shaking, with a docked tail. She was found tied to a tree, the woman said. She's afraid of men. Let's see how you do. Brad crouched down. Hey, girl. It's okay. I won't hurt you. The dog growled and pressed against the wall. She doesn't trust me, he said, lost. Because she was hit, Dr. Langley replied. You know how it is when it hurts more than you can show. Brad looked at her sharply but stayed silent. His fingers shook as he carefully set down a water bowl and backed away. The dog watched him for a long time, then stepped forward and licked the rim. See, Dr. Langley said. Everything starts with patience. That night, Mason sat on the steps, listening to Harper sleep. Maverick lay nearby, breathing softly. The stars burned above, the same ones he had slept under in Iraq. He knew a new battle was ahead, but this time the enemy wasn't a person, but time. I won't let you go alone, he whispered, hand on the dog's head. We'll go through this together, as always. The following weeks were a test for everyone. Brad kept going to the shelter, reluctantly at first, then with a strange inner pull. He began to know every dog by name, remembering who liked soft food or a ball. But one dog changed him most, the one afraid of men. He named her Lunar. Every day he sat by her cage in silence. Sometimes he read aloud, sometimes he just Saturday. After 2 weeks, Lunar finally approached and rested her head on his knees. That's when Brad realized trust isn't bought, it's earned. Mason, however, was fighting a different reality. Maverick's illness progressed. The dog struggled for breath more often but hid the pain. He still stood at every sound, guarding the house, as if he knew he couldn't quit before his master. Harper didn't know the whole truth, as Mason wanted to shield her, but a child senses what an adult tries to hide. One night, she woke to the sound of coughing and saw her father sitting on the floor by the dog. His hand shook as he petted Maverick. Dad, she said quietly, he'll get better, right? Mason looked up, eyes red and tired. We'll be with him. That's what matters. A few days later, Mason received a note. Dr. Langley wrote that one of the boys he sent to the shelter wanted to meet. It was Brad. Mason was hesitant, the past had taught him to keep his distance, but Harper convinced him. Dad, maybe he wants to apologize. You always say everyone deserves a chance. He agreed. They met in the shelter parking lot under the midday sun. Brad looked different, the mask of arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary but sincere expression. Thanks for coming, he said. I wanted to apologize. Not just for that day. For everything. Mason remained silent. You were right. I didn't understand anything. I laughed at pain because I couldn't feel my own. Now I do. I help here every day, even after my hours are up. He hesitated. If you ever need help with your dog, I'm here. The words were simple, without drama. Mason finally saw a man who had faced pain and made a choice. He nodded. All right. Come by tomorrow. We have work to do. The next day, Brad arrived. Mason brought Maverick into the yard. The dog was weak, but his eyes still held that same light, the pride of a soldier. He was part of a rescue op, Mason said, hand on the collar. Afghanistan. He pulled me out of the rubble when everything was burning. I promised I'd never let him suffer alone. Brad listened in silence. He looks strong. He is. Just the body is giving out. Harper stood nearby, holding an old patch. I made a medal for him, she said softly. For bravery and friendship. Mason smiled. He earned it. The three of them sat under an old tree. You know, Brad said, looking at the dog, Lunar finally slept next to me yesterday. Without fear. Maybe she feels what Maverick does, just having someone there. Mason nodded. That's the point of service. Being there when it's scary. Maverick lifted his head, looked at both of them, and rested his snout on Harper's lap. Later that evening, Mason and Brad sat on the porch with Maverick between them. I never thought a Navy SEAL would be my teacher, Brad chuckled. And I never thought the kid who threw soda at dogs would be someone I'd trust with my friend, Mason replied. They both laughed softly, a sound of relief. As the sun set, Harper called Maverick for dinner. He rose slowly, looked at the men as if checking if they were okay, and walked to their house. Mason watched him. He knows it's time. But I'm not ready. Brad didn't answer, just placed a hand on his shoulder. In that moment, age and rank didn't matter, only the respect of two people changed by a dog. That night, Harper saw her father outside with Maverick, covered in a blanket. Lunar was there too. Everything looked so peaceful under the moon. A week passed. The morning was calm. Harper was drawing in the kitchen while Mason sat by Maverick. The dog's breathing was heavy, but his eyes were clear. He didn't want to leave until everything was in place. Brad arrived with a new collar engraved, Maverick, Hero, Friend. Mason took it with trembling fingers. Thank you. He deserves the best. They went outside for a slow, proud walk, a final patrol. They reached the hill behind the house where they used to train. The dog lay on the grass. Harper hugged his neck. I love you, she whispered. Mason pressed his palm to the fur. Me too, old man. Thank you for everything. He didn't hide his tears. He felt the heart slow down until it stopped. Harper cried against his side. Brad stood nearby. He went out like a soldier. Mason nodded. Yes. On duty until the end. They buried Maverick under the tree. Harper left his medal and a ball. He'll guard us from heaven now, she said. Dr. Langley brought a plaque later. He saved lives, but mostly, he taught people how to be human. That evening, the three sat on the porch. Brad had Lunar, Harper had her drawing, and Mason watched the sky turn from gold to blue. I realize now why you didn't call the cops, Brad said. You wanted us to change ourselves. Police punish, Mason said, but only life can fix things. Harper looked at him. He's still with us. Always, Mason said. We just have to be the people he wanted us to be. A dog barked in the distance. Mason smiled. Let's go home, soldier, he whispered. As the shadows grew, it seemed for a moment a familiar silhouette ran across the hill toward the light. A month went by. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. Harper still put out a water bowl, just in case. Brad came over often to help with the house and take Harper to the shelter. Lunar was no longer afraid. One evening, Brad noted that strength is quiet, not loud. Mason agreed. He looked at his old dog tags. I thought Maverick saved me in the war. But maybe he saved me now, by reminding me why to live. Harper hugged him. He'd be proud of you. The sun dipped below the hills. A dog barked, familiar and steady. Harper asked, Did you hear that? It's him. Mason looked at the sky and nodded. Yes. It's him. The end of fear. The start of a new life.